Hi, my dragons. We're picking up. This is week 2, recording 2 of week 2. Still on the intro PowerPoint. So, gay activism also happened in the late 60s with the Stonewall riots. There have been gay people since the dawn of time, okay? Homosexuality has been around forever, and it's gone through different sorts of periods where it was accepted, where it was something that they expected, not only accepted, but expected people to engage in that sort of behavior. And but now in the 1960s, people were talking about it. Okay, people were demonstrating about it. People were demanding laws to be changed. And that period lasted from the late 1960s of extreme activism and legal changes, starting in the United States with people like Harvey Milk and Stonewall and things like that, right up to the current day. Okay, so so that was really a big deal. In the 80s, 1980, 81, 80, 81, we had what they called the gay plague, which today we call AIDS. But it went through, even, I was a gay activist. I was in ACT UP, which stood for AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And so when they first came out and said, hey, there's the gay disease, I was in college, getting ready to graduate from college, and I knew that it was not a gay disease, that it was an infectious disease, that diseases did not operate that way. Diseases don't just pick one kind of people to infect. It's just not how diseases work. So I was very nervous that, you know, people would start thinking about it like that, and no, it came forth that no, viruses and bacteria and plasmodic diseases, they just don't discriminate like that. They infect everybody. Given the opportunity, they will. So I joined this protest group and demanded changes to the law, and protested everywhere for AIDS education, AIDS prevention, and treatment. And it was a very, very stressful time in American history where nobody wanted to talk about it. There was a lot of stigmatization. There was a lot of blaming. Even if you didn't fall into the group that was most likely to contract AIDS, gay men, they would start discriminating against children and elderly people because it's a blood-borne disease, okay? That's what it is. It's transferred by blood. But back in the day, they didn't know how it was transferred, and there was a lot of stigma, and it was really intense. So I was glad that I was part of that whole AIDS activism. And I'll talk more about that in class when we get to that section. It was very exciting, but very, very frightening because you didn't know how it was contracted early on. And the name wasn't the same. It was first it was GRID. That's the first name they called it, gay-related immune deficiency. And the AIDS activists through ACT UP demanded that they change it and take the name away from gay, which, you know, we're having that same thing today with COVID, right? Some people refer to it as, you know, the Chinese disease and things like that. But again, infectious diseases don't discriminate. They're an equal opportunity virus, bacteria, or plasmodic disease. So there you go. So we'll see what happens today. I mean, we need some Chinese activists to go out there and demand that they not say that. So then we got AIDS prevention, education, and treatment, which certainly has saved lives because of those early activism stages. And sexual research. Sex research is like another cool thing that has come out of everything. We have done a pretty good job going from really conservatively, let's not talk about it, to much better focus on sexual education, sexual health, those kinds of things. Now, I asked on the first day of class, what did you have in terms of education in school? And some of you said you had very little. We're going to talk more about that once we do get into class, because it's shocking that we still don't talk about different things today, and we're really going to cover that. And so the early sex researchers were Kinsey and Masters and Johnson. Masters and Johnson, actually, they did some research. I think they were the ones at WashU in St. Louis. But they actually watched people have sex while they were hooked up to different machines and registered heart rate, blood flow and that kind of stuff, and they mapped out the stages of arousal and all of that, but that was considered like super controversial at the time. So today we see situations where teens are more sexually active. Teens are becoming sexually active at much lower ages. Hand in hand with this, they don't get the appropriate sex education that they need, not even at the college level. And so we have a whole bunch of people who don't know much about sexually transmitted diseases and just keep reinfecting each other. So that's really kind of interesting. Today we know a lot more than we did in the past about female sexuality, and female sexuality is something that researchers will do research on, and it is accepted and part of the literature now, the research literature. Sex is discussed openly and often. We have a lot of social media talking about sex, a lot more laws on the book concerning sexuality. And, pornography is just one click away, okay? So that's really interesting from where we came to where we are today. So the biological perspective on human sexuality is basically a great starting point for researchers. They want to know what goes into it from a biological level. They also want to know a neurological level and cardio research, all of that kind of stuff. So they're looking at genes, hormones, the nervous system, anything that's biological that goes into sexuality is really important. All you have to do is look at some of the products on the market and some of the advertisements about like ED and that kind of stuff, and you'll see how far we've come. Another thing is that we're doing a lot more research in fertility, and when we get to that chapter on the book, it's going to blow you away, some of the things that we do, which is really good because in the past, during your mother's time and your grandmother's, certainly in your grandmother's time, people were just told, oh, well, you can't have children, and they just went, oh, okay. And people tell me that today. I used to work in the what we would call the sexual dysfunctions lab, but it's the fertility clinic. So I used to work at a fertility clinic in a big hospital in a big city, and there is a lot that you could do. So when people tell me, I was told I can't have children, I'm always like, what do they tell you specifically? What kind of tests do they run and all that stuff? Because there's so much that you can do. You're really going to be fascinated by it. It is a really interesting area. And there's on slide 30, there's a video. I believe it's video 2, so click on that and watch that. It's on evolution and sex. So evolution looks at how we progress from a past state that we were in to a current state, and to where are we going in the future state. And this is also human sexuality and sexual behavior. Where were we before and where are we going now? So that's very important, and that is the evolutionary perspective, okay? So going hand in hand with evolution is the theory of natural selection. And natural selection is a process. In other words, when animals, and we use ethology, ethology, ethology. That's looking at animals and applying it to human behavior. Animal behavior, human behavior. And so you're looking at traits and biological components of behavior that are passed down from one generation to the next so that the whole species can evolve and change, okay? So in that regard, we're looking at which adaptive behaviors are critical for the survival of the species. Which type of reproductive behaviors are critical for the survival of the species, and how do we transmit that to future generations? So when you see people who are paired together, you'll see natural selection in its process, okay? So the cross-species perspective is what I was just telling you about. It's called ethology, okay? ethology. And we watch animal behaviors and we draw conclusions about human behaviors. There'll be a good study coming up in a couple of chapters about male versus female. What is male versus what is female? And is that just a human thing or does it cross species? And so they gave toys to human male and females, and they gave them to bonobo apes to see if there is a biological preference for particular toys. And guess what they found out? Males of both species chose the same toys, and females of both species chose the same toys. So, but you'll like that when you get to see that. It's really pretty interesting. So oftentimes we do research and we look at what other species are doing. We we look for ethology to answer some of our questions. I really, really like ethology. It's kind of a really cool area. Sociologically, we also study sexuality in terms of society. What are the cultural institutions and that form our beliefs about sexual attitudes, sexual behaviors? Is it religious oriented? Is it your ethnic or cultural or racial group or economic group? What is it that, is it your geographic area? Do Northerners feel differently than Southerners? Do they talk about different things? Do they do different things? Different cultural groups, are there different courtship behaviors and marriage behaviors and things like that? That's a sociological perspective, and the areas that they look at are marriage, sexual partners, masturbation, and kissing. A few years ago, we had a Surgeon General who was trying to get a grip on the United States and the AIDS epidemic, and it was a woman, said, well, one of the ways that you can really prevent AIDS transmission is to just encourage masturbation. And oh my God, the whole country went bananas when she said that. And she ended up leaving her post as Surgeon General. It was really unfortunate. What she said was true. I mean, if you're not having sex with another person, it will have an effect on AIDS transmission. But the country was just shocked that, number one, she would say it, and number two, she would actually recommend it. So that was very controversial, and even this was not even that long ago that it created such a controversy. So we have come a little bit of a way there. Our psychological perspective on human sexuality, of course, the psychologists are interested in how people learn and how they perceive things and what motivates people to choose a particular partner or to cheat, or to how they raise children differently. What's our emotional response to sexuality? And is there a personality associated with our sexual behaviors? So psychology looks at all of those kinds of things. It's really quite interesting. Sigmund Freud really started that conversation. He said that biologically, sex are controlled by society. He's the one that's first started talking about unconscious and conscious motivations for all behaviors, including sexuality, and divided people's personalities into id, which is the want part of your personality. I want this, I want to do that. The ego, which regulates between want and should and shouldn't. And superego is you shouldn't do that, or you should do this. So he's the one that developed that theory. And then he also did dream analysis, which talks about our fantasies, our dreams, what are our unconscious motivations, okay? And learning theorists looked at rewards and punishment. Hey, if my behavior is rewarded, then I will repeat it. And they actually simplified sexuality to that kind of simple thing going on. And cognitivists in psychology look at how do we think about behavior. And remember I told you the biggest sex organ is your brain. So that is a really big part of sexuality. How do you think about it? How do you make decisions? How do you problem solve? How do you learn? Like, did you learn to put on makeup from your older sister? Or did you learn about your period from your older sister? Or did you learn about wet dreams from your brother? Or how to be a man from your dad? All of these things would be something that a learning theorist would be interested in terms of sexuality. And there's on page 39 another video, I believe that's video 3, so please check that out. Other things that changed sexuality, feminist theories, the women's movement, that all came out in the 1970s. It challenged our sex stereotypes of men as being the king of the house and breadwinners, men as policymakers. We're still going through that today, so just saying. And so feminism had a really big effect on our perceptions of human sexuality, and still to this day, the right of control for a woman's body. And then queer theory is something that you see in colleges and universities, looking at gender roles and our expanded view of sexuality in terms of straight and gay and everything in between. So that's very interesting. So for this chapter, there's just a lot of multiple things to consider, and every one of them has something to offer. None of them are completely right, and none of them are completely wrong. So next week, we'll continue on the next chapter, and hopefully in person with more discussion. So see you next week, and remember, it's a great day to be a dragon.